Hello and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest this week is David Cay Johnston, Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter and founder of DCReport. His latest book is The Big Cheat: How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family. Our host is Sri Srinivasan, the Marshall Loeb Professor at the Stony Brook School of Journalism and co-founder of Digimentors, a digital and virtual events consultancy. This is Sri's first show of the year. I guest hosted the first two shows. We're thrilled to have Sri back in the chair, and I know he's thrilled to interview one of his journalism heroes, David Cay Johnston. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We're also live on our Digimentors website. Thank you to David. We're live on his Facebook page and Twitter account as well. We want to welcome all of his fans and friends who are joining the show today. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer and occasional guest host of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Please make sure to let us know where you're watching from, to tag friends, to share, retweet, like the post. If you're watching on Facebook or Twitter, make sure you click play on the video. So if you leave a comment, we'll be sure to see it. We're here every week reviewing the New York Times, the print edition of the New York Times. And what we want to do now is to show you a quick recap of all the guests we've had in 2021. Lots of Pulitzer Prize winners, lots of New York Times editors and writers. I'm sure you'll recognize more than a few of the names and faces. And of course, today's guest, as I mentioned earlier, David Cay Johnston. Thank you so much for everyone who is watching today. Let's take a quick look at who's joining us. Jonathan Borstein, greetings from the East Village. Pradnya Haldapur, watching from Silver Spring, Maryland. Doug Levy getting up early from Marin County, California. Michael Troutman watching, saying hello to Mr. Johnston. We'll ask David about him a little bit later. Our friend Stephen Kaplan, watching from Ramsey, New Jersey. Miriam Berkeley, watching from Hell's Kitchen. Diane Stefani, watching from New York City. Patricia Freudenberg, watching on LinkedIn. Ron Thomas, our friend who is mostly in Dubai, watching from Verona, New Jersey. Ron, always a pleasure. Michael Johnson watching, saying hi to David as well. Deborah Kerr saying hi from Chile, Fort Lauderdale. John Witta maybe, early in Phoenix, Arizona. Good morning. Ted Coleman watching from Washington, D.C. Ann Arrigo watching from New Hyde Park, New York. Jamie Shum watching from Dutchess County. Michael Troutman's watching from Heidelberg, Germany, actually. And Michael Johnson is from Independence, Missouri. Diane Rohini watching from the San Francisco Bay Area. Eve watching from Charlotte, North Carolina. Michael's putting out a quick challenge. Who can beat Germany in terms of distance? We will see soon. Ellen from the Upper East Side. My mom. Hi, Mom. Watching from Tampa, Florida, where she is escaping the New York winter. Patricia says that was a wonderful reflection of our 2021 guest. Thank you, Patricia. Naomi Service, looking forward to today's program. Liz Pressman from the Berkshires. Deborah Bernick from DC, Arlington, Virginia, very close to where I am in Springfield. Mary Curtis, one of our former guests. She has to check out her acquaintance and colleague, David Cay Johnston. Carla Baranakis, one of our producers. Mary Curtis, again, Sujana Chandrasekhar watching, and P. Otis from Morristown, New Jersey. Let's go ahead and bring on our host, Sri Srinivasan. We'll make a few more announcements. We'll thank our staff and our sponsor and take a look at the paper. Sri, welcome to the show. Welcome back. We missed you for the past 2 weeks.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be back. I was in Puerto Rico for 16 days, glorious days, where it was 75 to 80 degrees, while in New York it was 32 degrees and less most of those days. So I can't say I'm happy to be here, but I'm delighted to talk to David and to be with my New York Times Read Along family. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for your incredible support of the show. Let's thank our staff that puts this together every week, starting with Neil Parekh, who has been our executive producer and guest host. Thank you, Neil, for all you do. Please follow him at Neil Parekh. Paula Kiger at Big Green Pen. Steve Taylor at Steve DeReeve. Julia Weeks at Julia L. Weeks, and Carla Baranakis at Kabara. No one else would be able to help us put together such a great show. You see how they annotate the stories we mention. When David talks about something, you'll see it on the screen immediately. Even big-time TV shows are not able to do that, but we can do that because of this incredible team. They're all part of DigiMentors, the social media consulting company and virtual events and hybrid events production company that I co-founded with my friend Andrew Lee. And all these folks work with me. I'm so grateful to them. We do social and digital consulting, virtual event production, hybrid events, event and launch amplification. If you have a book launch or anything like that, talk to us. Talk shows and podcasts of your own. And of course, training and workshops around the world. So please talk to us. We'd love to work with you. And we also want to thank our sponsors. They make this show possible. Muckrack. Everyone should know Muckrack. You just go to muckrack.com. Journalists and PR people, anyone in the comms business needs to know Muckrack. If you're a journalist, it's completely free. The others can pay for it, and you'll find it very helpful. If you'd like to be a sponsor of this or any of our shows, please reach out to me, Sri at digimentors.group, or Neil at digimentors.group. We are so excited to have David with us. He'll be joining me in just a minute. Before that, we do want to just quickly take a look at the papers, and we want to thank also David's own audience who are joining us here via Twitter and all the social media channels. Sunday, New York Times. I've taken off my address at the top, and you can see here new COVID cases in the U.S. drop as Omicron eases. Glimmers of progress, but tallies in some states continue to soar. It's not over. I think that's very important. Russia is set to plot for ally to rule in Kiev, the big story out of Ukraine. And here's a look at NYPD officers gathered on a Saturday at Harlem Hospital, where Wilbert Mora was in critical condition after a shooting on Friday. And that was a police officer responding to a domestic violence situation. It says here, a calm 911 call, then a barrage of deadly shots. The games that she built entirely on his terms. This is, of course, about the Beijing Olympics, bulldozing natural and political obstacles. Let's see what else is on the front page. Did the stimulus fuel inflation rates? A policy debate heats up. And January 6 marchers, still defiant, see it as day one of movement. And imagine that terrible, awful movement. We'll get to talk to someone who's covered the Trump criminal enterprise for 40 years. And he'll be joining us in just a minute. A quick tour of the rest of the paper. The Sunday cover is "We're out of here." I guess this is about quitting and the great resignation. I want to find out from David what it says about the laws of economics that people are quitting like this, and I want to learn from him. The Sunday Styles cover here, you can tell if you know the fashion world, Andre Leon Talley, the legendary editor of fashion and so much more, who passed. And look how quickly they got it on the cover of Sunday Style. The Sunday Review, things are not still normal, or still not normal. This is the cover is hard to kind of figure out, but it's about the first year of the Biden presidency. The real estate cover is the pandemic by design. Here's what it looks like when the pros take on DIY projects during COVID. That should be a fun story. And the Metropolitan cover is how fire defined the Bronx and us growing up in the 70s and 80s. Big story there. A lot of us will remember, those of us who grew up in New York at that time, or just lived in New York at that time. Untamed and nearly uncanceled. This is the Kathy Griffin story, trying to get back on the D list, as she says. And Of Two Minds is a review of The Zen of Therapy, Uncovering a Hidden Kindness in Life by Mark Epstein. And finally, the book, the magazine cover is In the Trenches of Ukraine's Forever War, James Verini's story and photographs by Paolo Pellegrin. So we have so much to cover, and we have just the perfect person to be our guest today on the 1-year anniversary of the end of the Donald Trump presidency and the start of the Joe Biden era. And we are delighted to have with us David Cay Johnston. He's at David KJ, C-A-Y-J. Please follow him. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter and founder of DCReport. His latest book is The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and his family. I love his very direct titles of his books, as you'll hear in the other books as well. If you're watching right now, folks, please forward this, retweet this, tag someone in the world who would benefit from hearing David's voice and his story and all the things that he's going to be schooling me on. You can tag anyone. They can watch right after this show ends. It will restart on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and on LinkedIn. And look at all these folks watching from around the world. My dad, T.P. Srinivasan, says he's been missing the read along for a long time. Good to be back. Michael's in Heidelberg. I think my dad wins for furthest distance from New York City. But without further ado, let's bring on the great David Cay Johnston. I'm so excited to have him here with us. And hello.
Thank you, Sri. It's very nice to be here this morning.
And I see that you and Neil got the memo on the right colors to wear today, and I didn't. There you go. Look at that site. But I'm just so grateful, David, to be here with you and to have you with us. I know that Neil and you had a fantastic conversation preparing for this. I've been reading on the Kindle, and I don't have my physical copy, but on the Kindle, your book, which is so important. Everybody should go get this. It's called The Big Cheat. And we'll talk about that book. We'll talk about your career. You'll explain what's going on, what the heck is going on in the world. And Neil is going to...
So I'm going to interrupt for just a second, Sri. If you can hear me, David, you can hear me, right? So Sri is not getting audio. I'm going to send him a note. I'm going to take him off screen. We're having a little difficulty with Sri's audio. So we're going to ask him to restart his computer and to plug into his phone so he can get his audio. But as we start, as Sri is coming back on, David, I want to start off with the question that we ask all of our guests. We're coming on 2 years with the pandemic. It really, it started gaining traction in January, February of 2020. Now, March, everything locked down. How have you fared? How's your family fared? We're hoping that health has been okay. We're hoping that it hasn't been too difficult. But I mean, the big cheat, obviously, that's part of your pandemic story, I assume. But on a personal basis, how have you fared?
I've done just fine. I'm at an age where if I never get to leave my home again, I'll be just fine, even if I'm lucky enough to live another 20 years, which is highly unlikely. I worry a lot about young people. Tomorrow, I'll resume teaching in the law school at Syracuse. I'm not a lawyer, but I've taught law there since 2009. And I'm waiting to hear from the young people there about how things are. My two youngest grandsons, who are 18 and 17, and many other young people I've had reason to hear about from parents and grandparents, they're not doing so well. And I would imagine if I were 16 or 17 or 18 again, I wouldn't be doing well in this, because this is a very unnatural state of things. But, I don't live in a multi-generational small apartment as many poor people do. I live in a very large house with landscape grounds in a place where I can afford it, Rochester, New York. And all 8 of my children are long grown and gone. So I'm doing fine. I worry about people who live in densely populated locations, people who, in order to make a living, have to go to work every day as a motorman for the MTA or a nurse, or even just a clerk at intake in a hospital emergency room. Those are the people for whom this has really been a disaster. And I'm astonished at the disrespect of them that I see by many prominent politicians, including people who hope to be in the White House come 2025.
And we have Sri back. Sri, you can hear us? Great. Go ahead, Sri. I want everyone to know that I jumped in very reluctantly, because I know how excited Sri was to be able to interview again, especially after having you at Social Media Weekend 3 years ago, where he called you one of his journalism heroes. I have to admit, I mean, I haven't known you as long. I'm thrilled to have had our conversation before and get to know you. But Sri, this is your interview. Please take it away.
Thank you.
Let's not do that. Let me. I think it's your phone, Sri. I think we need to.
Well, he just muted his computer.
He muted his computer, but we still need to get his audio. Yeah. So it's not connected, but it's your pencil cam, Sri. That's we need to make sure that that's not. So this is what Sri is going to use to show the paper. That will have you have to mute that so that we're not getting the audio there as well. Mute it's muted. Let's try again, Sri. Maybe it'll work. Unmute yourself on the laptop. And no. So I will keep working, and Sri will figure it out. So David, so in terms of the big cheat, let's go right to the book. And first of all, thank you for sharing about the last 2 years. The big cheat, how Donald Trump fleeced America and enriched himself and his family. Few people are as well positioned to write an expose of the former president as Johnston. The Big Cheat is a guided tour of the Trump circus in 18 colorful vignettes. A good book full of old-fashioned reporting based on original sources and primary documents. That's James Quack in the Washington Post. In your own words, tell us about the Big Cheat and how this fits into your long-term work looking at Donald Trump.
Sure. Let me, if I may, first from the hard copy, read you
Please.
The third of the blurbs on the book.
Yes.
I know the reporter is a weird dude who's been following me for 25 years, so obviously he hasn't done so well. He's been following me in a negative fashion for 25 years, always a hit, and I'm president. So he hasn't done a very good job, Donald Trump. I wanted to use the one where he says he hates me more than any other journalist in the world. I've written 3.5 books about Donald. The first book, Temples of Chance, came out in 1992, and it was about Atlantic City and the spread of gambling across America. And I predicted how gambling was going to spread and almost perfectly hit it on the nail, which states were going to adopt gambling and how and when. And it was full of these fascinating characters, Donald and many others in the gambling business, and about the corruption, the official corruption, how the New Jersey regulators looked the other way and how they claimed that Atlantic City was the most heavily regulated place in the world. And yet I was able to name 13 and 14-year-old children who gambled and who had lines of credit, liquor, limousines, things that should have cost casino owners like Donald his license. That was in 1992. In June of 2015, Donald comes down the staircase, the escalator, to announce his candidacy. And as I watched this, I immediately realized I had to drop everything I was doing. I was finishing a book that I hope to have out in 2023 that proposes an entirely new federal tax system, a system that every expert who's looked at it says would work if the public would get behind it. And what terrified me was not just Donald and understanding what it would mean to have someone who is a criminal, mentally ill, and a complete malicious narcissist in the White House. It was my fear that politics reporters, and I always call them politics reporters, not political reporters, that the politics reporters would dismiss his campaign. He had said he was running in 2012. Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC and me independently were the only 2 journalists nationally who said he's not running for president, he's running for a new contract with NBC. And indeed, Donald announced one day, well, I should be president. No one is qualified like I am to be president, but my TV show needs me more. And the politics reporters had egg on their face. And sure enough, the politics reporters dismissed him until he had the nomination locked up. And I wrote pieces directed at journalists. You should be asking these questions on the campaign trail. The only times those questions were asked were by other candidates, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio in particular. So I tried to sell a book. Alice Martell, who's been my agent since 1990, got turned down everywhere. He's not going to become president. There's nothing there. He'll fall by the wayside. We're not going to do a book until it was too late. And then a very small publishing house called Melville House in Brooklyn, for less than a magazine fee, asked me to write The Making of Donald Trump. And in that I detailed, his involvement with a major drug trafficker. Basically, Donald, in my view, was in the cocaine business. He just never got arrested. And we did that book in 27 days of writing, and it was on the market 2 weeks after I finished writing it.
Wow.
Then I did the follow-up book a year later for Simon & Schuster about evaluating his presidency and showing that he was fulfilling his promise to destroy our federal government, which the New York Times never reported it in those words. But if you listen carefully what he said, that's what he said. I'm going to destroy the administrative government. And then I did this book at Simon & Schuster's request, The Big Cheat, and it's about how he, his family, and his cronies turned the federal government into an ATM machine. They had varying degrees of success, but the key thing I did in this book, and it's gotten much better reviews on Amazon and other places than I expected from people, is I was reading everything I could find, and I have a research assistant, one of my grown children. If you were simply reading the New York Times rigorously every day, or even the Times and the Journal and the Washington Post every day, you would not capture the fullness of what was going on. And I went to all of these sources. And in all of my books about Trump, everything is on the record. There's no unnamed sources. It's either direct conversations between Donald and me, or I have a citation for it, because there's such a robust record of his misconduct. So
Got it.
Thank you, and I'm so glad to hear you're getting to work with one of your children. That's awesome. We're getting multiple comments about the quick turnaround. We have a lot of authors and people who want to be authors, so they're stunned by how quickly you were able to get the book out. So, any quick tips on working with that kind of nimble house versus somebody who has a bigger operation but may take a year to pull a book together?
Well, somebody who I was a mentor to 40 years ago is trying now to do a book about something that's evolving quickly. And she called me the other day asking, I'm supposed to do this book. What do I do? And I said, every day, write down whatever you can complete. And then later, all you have to do is pick up these threads and stitch them together. And I said, there's this wonderful thing called tagging. So when you write, here's 2 paragraphs you wrote that are likely to be set in stone, and you've made your source note at the bottom of the page for it. Then all you have to do is look for that tag, and you can help pull things together very quickly. After all, we write on deadline in the newspaper, usually not more than, unless it's a huge, unusual story and you're the rewrite person, as I have been on occasion, we're usually talking about relatively short stories, 500-600 words. But if you can write on deadline, you'll do fine.
That's great advice already. Amy is taking note. And Mary says, good morning, David. I can't wait for you to spill the tea. I know it's steaming hot already. We've heard some great lines from David. In terms of...
You'll notice the bottom of this cup has a little ring, 2 rings here.
Yes.
This actually connects to my iPhone, and it's a heated cup. And so while I like my coffee a little warmer than 145 degrees, this keeps it at 145 degrees till the battery runs out. It's a great little thing one of my 8 children gave me for my birthday.
Yes, this is a point to bring to everybody, that you are prolific in every way, including with 8 children. So that's awesome. Miriam says, David's compassionate approach is much appreciated. I'll just share a piece of advice I got from my friend Chip Scanlon, who's a wonderful writing teacher at Poynter and has a great book out about the art of writing. He quotes Donald Murray, who said, a page a day is a book a year. So anybody who feels like writing a book is impossible, a page a day is a book a year.
Well, I also tell people, nobody writes a book. Even novelists who have long, complex stories. You write an abstract, and since it's for you, just, this book is about, and then write what it's about concisely. And then you write pieces of it, and you fit them together. Now, some critics have said my books read like a series of magazine articles. I'll accept the criticism. That's not unreasonable. I write a little segue to go from one chapter to the next. But don't approach it that you're going to write the book. You're going to write a chapter or a piece of it. And if you think about it that way, you'll get the book done.
Thank you. Honey says, thanks, David, for the tips. And we are seeing lots of comments about the book process. And one of our friends just bought your book and says, thank you very much. And Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar, who hosts a wonderful show called She's on Call as a surgeon with her surgeon friend Marina Kurian on these channels on most Sundays, she says that at 8 children, she only has 4, so she's half the person you are, she says.
No, she's twice as smart as I am.
She's twice as smart. Oh, then I'm super smart because I only have 2, and my twins are a wonderful handful, so I can't imagine. But let's keep going. John says, wonderful to hear from you, Mr. Johnston. Thank you for all you do. Go get him. And let's talk a little bit about that. You grew up at the New York Times in part, and you made your bones there and as well as in other places. The way you're able to directly go after Trump and use these terms, the big cheat, end the business, end the government, business of government, et cetera, all of that is against the rules of a place like the Times and the journalism that many of us grew up in. So talk about that. Was that freeing? Do you get kind of disapproval from some of your old friends?
I haven't heard any disapproval, but I'm sure there are people who, when I die, will hold parties because there are people who hate my guts with a passion. Sri, how I started out is important. When I was 17 years old, married and an expectant father and a senior in high school, I was approached by a shopper newspaper where I lived in Santa Cruz, California, to write columns for them. And then they sent me to the school board. to cover it. And one of the first stories I wrote, there was a press release. Property taxes in the Santa Cruz schools next year will go up by $43.02, or will go up by $43.02 for the owner of the average Santa Cruz home worth $34,211. By the way, the average home there now is over $1 million. And I just looked at that as a kid knowing nothing and went, that's useless unless you own a house worth $34,211. So I, in long division, turned it into a percentage. And then I wrote, your property tax will go up next year by, I think it was $1.32 for each $1,000 the county assessor says your house is worth. And pretty soon this got attention. I was riding in the car one day and a San Francisco radio station owned by the NBC network is reading one of my stories on the air in a shopper. And the guy says, why don't we have news like this in the Chronicle? And so at 18, I was recruited to the San Jose Mercury. And when I went over to see them in person, they laughed at me for an hour. They thought it was hilarious. They brought over some poor copy kid who was getting a master's in journalism, hoping they'd be hired as a reporter after he got a master's. But the next opening they had, they hired me. So at 19 years old, I was a front page staff writer. I wrote at the age of 19 at least 2 lead page 1 stories in the San Jose Mercury. So I just was self-taught. Nobody taught me how to do this, and I had my own approach to it. I had the good fortune for 12 years. I went to the Mercury, the Detroit Free Press in Lansing, then the LA Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and then the New York Times. During the 12 years I was at the LA Times, it was a very literary newspaper. I posted a little note in the newsroom one day about how we were a magazine posing as a daily newspaper. And it allowed me to do things like my favorite story of my career is not an investigative piece. It's about a lawsuit in San Francisco and the hearing before a municipal judge. It was a lawsuit over 4 cents. And it was what I call a camera story. I gave you the sense that you're sitting in the courtroom, and that ran on the front page of the LA Times. And we had a clip service back then. More than 200 newspapers around the country ran this story from 1977 or 1978. I discovered the New York Times is not so appreciative of that kind of approach to things, and not appreciative of a sense of humor, I guess. When Donald Trump's Taj Mahal Casino opened, it was so gaudy that I wrote, using GAUD, and my front page Philadelphia Inquirer story, taking the line from from Samuel Beckett, "What hath God wrought?" and was told by a masthead editor at the New York Times years later, that is the worst lead I have ever read in my life. I had the good fortune of this unusual background of doing investigative reporting, but I would also break in, Sri, and do features. I wrote one in the LA Times about the love life of a salamander in Santa Cruz, California, an endangered species known locally, and I grew up there, of course, as Santa Cruz Sally. That also ran on the front page of the paper. And I would do these because when I was young and I started to meet investigative reporters, and there weren't many in the late 60s and early 70s, I noticed the ones who were older, whose hair had begun to turn gray. Many of them were paranoid and they were miserable human beings. And I just said, I'm not going to be like that. So I would take these little breaks and diversions, and I'd write about artisan paper making or how buildings learn from Stuart Brand's book, or monks who make fudge, just things to get your head cleared out of that, and then go back and dig into wrongdoing by, say, the LAPD or all the tax shelters that I exposed when I was at the New York Times.
I want to say that today, in terms of Twitter, we call that a timeline cleanser, where you're posting something that's nice and different from all the terrible doom scrolling we do. Before we get a little bit deeper into your book and then we get to the paper, I do want to ask, there you were, you and your, you were 17 and a high school senior, and you were both pregnant. For a lot of people in America today, that would be the end of their story. Any hope of them ending up becoming one of the most successful, important journalists of their lifetimes would be impossible. What were the circumstances personally and societally that made it possible in those days that make it so much harder today to have that from that point?
Well, I grew up in a very unusual household. My mother was a disowned heiress who testified against her father in the spring of 1941 in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, where his mistress's husband was suing for alienation of affection. Imagine going to a lawyer today and saying you want to sue someone who's involved with your spouse for that. They'd laugh you out of the law office. But my grandfather had to pay because the chief witness against him was my mother, who worked for his lumber baron's business and produced the business records of the affair. My father and my mother was also one of the first 75 people in the world to reach, I forget exactly what it's called, but International Grandmaster in Duplicate Bridge. My father was a 100% disabled veteran of World War II. He was a chef, and even though he was disabled, he kept working till he couldn't, and then he died. And so I grew up in this strange, difficult household with my father dying and my mother, frankly, nuts. And my girlfriend, the mother of the first 6 of my children, grew up, she was Cinderella. She was absolutely Cinderella. And I rescued her. One of my grown children says, she had what I wanted, which was a seemingly stable household. And I wanted what she wanted, and she wanted what I had, which was, we're going to go somewhere. We're going to make something of ourselves. And I was told when I was 17, you've ruined your whole life. You're going to end up being a mechanic if you're lucky. And I just went ahead and did what I wanted to do, including going to college full time. At one point, I had 21 units at 3 different campuses, worked full time for the San Jose Mercury as the Peninsula Bureau Chief in Redwood City, and wrote at least 1 story a week for the New York Times as a stringer. But today, it would be much, much more difficult. The economy's changed. In 1960s, people didn't worry about finding a job. No, people didn't think like they do now. I've written extensively about how the bottom 90% of Americans, when you adjust for inflation, had a smaller income in 2019 than in 1973. And on top of that, instead of maybe 40% of them having a pension on top of their pay, virtually no one earns a pension now. So you have to save out of your pay. When I was at the Mercury, fully paid healthcare was completely covered by the company on top of my wages. And my base salary at 19 in today's money was $55,000 or $56,000. And with overtime and War Orphans Act money, because my dad was disabled, I was making over $70,000 a year at 19. Today, I see journalists on the Plan B site at Facebook talking about being offered jobs at $30,000, $25,000. Certainly in this field, things would be very different. And the reason is very simple. It's what I wrote about in my trilogy on the American economy: perfectly legal on taxes, free lunch on subsidies, and the fine print on monopolies. Congress has restructured the government to work against people and in favor of corporations. And the evidence is in the public record. It's overwhelmingly there, but most journalists haven't taken the time to understand how it works, so they don't explain it. And a good example, by the way, is the Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal all had stories in yesterday's papers saying that Intel was going to invest $20 billion building microchip fabricating plants in Ohio. And they just made a simple line in each one that essentially said the state's going to provide them with some benefits. Now, when we finally get the documents, the taxpayers are going to put up the capital. GE, in one case, got 92% of the money for a factory out of the taxpayers. And in 20 states, politically favored companies get to keep the state income taxes withheld from their workers' paychecks. Rupert Murdoch had this deal. It's why he moved all those employees after 9/11 to New Jersey, because New York doesn't have it, but New Jersey did. And why am I not reading this in the newspaper? Because too much of journalism is what sources tell you, instead of just looking at the documentary record. It's right there in front of your eyes.
I think the point you're making, too many journalists are stenographers instead of doing the digging and looking at the documents and the data. Thank you so much.
Even really good ones, Sri, even really good ones, often they report what their sources are saying, and they may do it critically and do it well, but seriously, they don't look at the record. And there's plenty of documentation. You have to, however, go and study to learn what that means. The reason I don't have a college degree, I have 8 years of college, but no degree, including doctoral level studies at the University of Chicago, is I studied what I thought would advance my career. I didn't say, oh, what do I have to do to get your piece of paper?
I understand that. Lauren says, David, I miss working with you. And so many great comments. Ken says, what an audacious start you had, David. And that remains the cut of your jib. What a comment. And Amy says, we need to have him back on the read-along over and over again. This is one of my favorite read-alongs. And everyone, in addition to his book, he has a website, DCReport, where you will read things that you won't in any other place. The kinds of things he's talking about, the kind of stories. Will says, what a life story. As always, David provides the facts, context for a reality check. And Will's watching from New Orleans, and Jessica says perfectly legal was amazing. Thanks, David. And just so much great information coming. Everyone who's watching right now, tag a friend, retweet. They can watch live or watch as soon as it's off the air on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And please follow David on Twitter. He's at David CAYJ. And please check out DCReport. You will learn a lot. We have just a couple more minutes on David's career, and then we're going to get to the paper. I do want to ask you about your work at the Times. What were some of the things that you're most proud of? And what is your advice for the journalism leaders there today?
Well, Gerald Boyd taught me a great lesson. When I went for my interview, what used to be called running the blue wall, he really put me through the ringer for 15 minutes. And then he stopped, he laughed, he said, you're in. And he said, there's one lesson you need to make sure you learn about this place. You can do anything you want if you just think about how to make it happen. And that's pretty much what I discovered, that you could make things happen. Resist the efforts by the committee of editors when you have a big heave for everybody to weigh in and dilute your story. Mm-hmm. And that may mean, staying there until the presses start rolling at night. I've had several big pieces that I think would have been much better if people hadn't messed with them. I wrote about one of them in one of my books, the lead I wrote and the lead we ran. And the lead we ran was a sort of lead. Think outside the box, listen to ordinary people about what happens to them, how systems affect what they do. Jason DeParle, is that how you pronounce it? DeParle? It's a red word for me.
I always try to guess that. Yeah.
He does just brilliant work about the poor in America. He's not in the paper nearly as often as I'd like to see, but he does really good work because he goes out and talks to people and he listens to them, which is not the same as hearing them. So I think those are very important things. And then the Times being, 1,700 super smart, neurotic writers and editors, you have to learn how to navigate the editor system and figure out, who's your friend and who isn't. And most of all, thank the copy editors. I realize we really don't have copy editors per se anymore, but the copy editors and the caption writers are really important to communicating clearly to the readers.
Yes, hooray for copy editors. And we want to point out that Carla Baranakis, who works with us on this show, was national copy chief, and Paula Kiger is a great editor herself. And there aren't enough copy editors in our lives, and we should all have them, even if our current employment situation doesn't allow us access to them. Find them in your lives and work with them because they make a difference. They save your stories. And that's what I think a lot of young journalists miss. Let's read a couple more comments. Sujana is being thanked by Sandra, says, thank you for alerting me to this. This is so insightful and refreshing. So everyone should do this. And the website for DC Report is dcreport.org. Please check that out and see everything that's there. Diana says, listen to ordinary people. Brilliant advice from David. My last question before we get to the paper, it has to be about Donald Trump. I suffered from Trump derangement syndrome, which is a real thing where it drove you crazy. It's sort of like the way I read the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal to kind of raise my heartbeat in the morning. I read that first in that paper. But talk to me about your relationship with him. We got some glimpses of it in what you said. I remember somebody asking you, how could you call the president of the United States Donald? He's the president. And then you had a wonderful line back about that. So let's go on a little Trump riff here.
Sure. You know, when I was exposing the LAPD, which ruined my career at the LA Times, I always called the chief Daryl. And I had some cops one day corner me and say, he's the chief. Why don't you call him chief? And I said, if I were a police officer, I'd call him chief. We're both citizens of Los Angeles. We're equals. And he's Daryl. And the same thing with Donald. You know, he's Donald. I call Nancy Pelosi Nancy. Nobody seems to think anything strange about that. We need to keep in mind that our elected leaders work for us. We don't work for them. We are their bosses. That's one of the fundamental theories of DC Report. So I met Donald in 1988 when I went to Atlantic City as the bureau chief there for the Inquirer because I wanted to write about the expansion of the gambling business, and Gene Roberts bought into my idea for that. And right off the bat, people started telling me that he was a complete idiot who knew nothing about the gambling business. And I would look at him and say, what are you talking about? He owns 2 casinos. He has to know the gambling business. And one of his executives, actually several of his executives, after explaining to me that he was messing up the business because he didn't know what to do, helped me fashion for my first serious meeting with him, which was maybe a week after I got to Atlantic City, 4 questions about gambling. And in all 4 cases, the questions were false. They had misstatements of fact. And in all 4 cases, Donald assumed the question was valid and ran with it. And if you watch closely, he did this as president. He did it most famously in an interview with Lester Holt of NBC News. And that's when I realized he's a con artist. Hi, we're the California psychics. We're the real psychics who will tell you whether your boyfriend really loves you. That's all he was. He's a con artist. He's the 3rd generation head of a 4-generation crime family. And very quickly, Donald realized that I didn't just republish his nonsense. I checked the facts on things and then reported them. So we've had what I would describe as a fairly contentious relationship since 1989, which was the first of scores of times, certainly dozens of times, he called me up at home to say, I'm going to sue you. And I'd say, well, Donald, if you have a case, sue me. He never has.
So that's saying something. Can you explain what's happening in the courts and the legal system right now? There was a lot in the news these last few days.
Donald is going to be indicted. The reason it's taking time for the Manhattan grand jury is they expected to get about 1 million pages of business records from the Mazars accounting firm, and they got 5 million pages. They have to go through all of that and analyze it and understand it. Letitia James, the New York State Attorney General, only has inherent civil power. And let me just digress to say, I'm not a lawyer, but I have been teaching law at Syracuse University's College of Law since 2009, and I've lectured on the law on every continent except Antarctica. I should have taken the bar exam when I had the opportunity in California. The state case that the Times broke the story on last Tuesday night makes compelling evidence of calculated systematic tax cheating of the kind the Times exposed back in 2018 and very graciously gave me some credit for inspiring that work. He's facing a request for a special grand jury in Fulton County, Georgia, over the effort to concoct 11,000 votes on his behalf. He'd actually need 22,000 votes to overcome the number. And so, this has happened slowly, much too slowly. But keep in mind that from the moment Watergate was concocted until Nixon resigned was 2 years and 8 months. Things do take time. And there's an old saying in the law, if you're going to go after the king, you have to kill him. That's why you didn't see the slam dunk case brought over the payoff money to Stormy Daniels, with whom what newspapers keep calling an affair was, according to Stormy, an encounter that lasted a fraction of a minute. And so all this is going to happen. It's just a function of time. What we should be worried about are the people who share Donald's desire to become our dictator and who have the skill to do what he didn't have to pull it off. So Josh Hawley, Ron DeSantis, the unindicted Medicare billion-dollar thief, Senator Rick Scott, and others. We should be very worried, because it's very clear that a whole lot of people right now will perfectly happily give up democracy for white supremacy. And that should really bother us. And to those people listening, if you live in a state where you're going to have to stand in line for 11 hours to vote, or you're going to have to, bird dog your registration and go through a lot of pain, I feel for you. It's not fair. It shouldn't happen. But keep in mind that more than 1 million people have died for this country, and the difficulty you're going to have is minimal compared to them.
Thank you. Thank you, David. That's so important, that people are willing to trade democracy for white supremacy. It's a line I'm not going to forget. I'm going to read a couple more comments, and then we're going to get to the paper. Zan says, Donald is going to be indicted. Okay, if David Cay says it, then it must be true. Ted says, thank you, Mr. Johnston, for calling attention to how fundamentally Congress, courts, and regulators have shifted the burdens of economic activity to households from businesses and institutions. And these are all such important comments. Thank you all for posting and reading, tagging your friends so that they can all meet David and understand what's going on. For the skeptics, David, who say, this will never happen, Trump will not get indicted, that's too much at stake, the system will not allow it. What do you say?
Oh, it's going to happen. Mark Pomerantz, who is the leading authority on RICO laws in America, both as a prosecutor and a defense lawyer, didn't give up his multi-million-dollar income to work for a government salary unless he knew this was going to be the most important thing he could ever do in his life. You are not going to see a primary tax charge against Donald. He can get out of that, and I've written extensively about how and why. But you're going to see a New York State RICO charge, Article 460 of the New York Penal Code. But patience here about this. It will happen. The political resolve, the ethical resolve to do this is there. The need is very apparent to a lot of people, and I said in the very beginning of this, in 2015, I said, Donald will never leave the White House peacefully. And there were journalists, including a few of my former New York Times colleagues, who said, man, you're really way out there. And I said, you don't know the man like I know the man. He won't.
And you were right.
Yeah. And my batting average so far on predictions about him is 1,000%. I haven't missed on a single prediction of what he would do if he got in the White House. There were some things he didn't do, like he didn't have me arrested. Which I said if he could find a way to do that, he would. But everything he did do follows what I predicted. And so, trust that the system here is going to work. We don't know if a jury will act. After all Donald needs is one ringer on a jury who will say, I'll follow the law, but who intends to, in fact, see to it that there's not a 12-0 as required verdict of guilt.
Yeah, and that I think is a high bar. For those who are not in America, the RICO charges are what they use to go after the mafia. So that gives you a sense of
racketeering.
Yeah, exactly. Mary says, thank you for stating that so clearly. About white supremacy and democracy, David. But during the New York Times alumni chat, when you said that, I was alarmed that so many of us did not believe you and said it would not happen. I know from my experience that is happening already. What will convince so many well-meaning white Americans is a question she asks. And one of the things that I always said, Black folks who have been paying attention have been warning us about all of this for decades. And here we are. So that's your final question, David, from me. Neil's going to come in and read the paper with you. Thank you again, David. Let's put David's book jacket up again so that everyone can know what they should be buying for their January gifts. The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself and His Family, by David Cay Johnston. His last book was It's Even Worse Than You Think, and that was so true. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to step out and Neil's going to take over. Thanks very much. And everyone follow David at David CAYJ.
Thank you, Sri. We'll go ahead and turn to the paper, and David will take a quick look at what we're seeing. As Sri mentioned earlier, we're looking at the front page. We have the this picture of the NYPD officers gathered at Harlem Hospital, where one of their own was in critical condition. What was interesting is, David, you had your paper as well, your Buffalo edition, right?
Right.
A very different front page. Hold that up again, if you don't mind.
Sure.
That was the on the Olympics in Beijing, correct?
Things are different. The Olympics is printed earlier. The Olympics and the picture of the birdcage in Beijing is on the front page. But also, you'll notice the COVID story in my edition is 2 columns. One column in the later editions, because there's an added story about Ukraine.
Exactly.
And I particularly noticed this because the first time I had a story of mine, no byline, in the New York Times, was a Sunday 600-word story in 1971 about a difference in revolutionary style between Black and Latino self-styled revolutionaries in East Palo Alto, California. And it disappeared in the later editions because of the Pentagon Papers story that broke that Sunday.
The Pentagon Papers broke that Sunday. Wow. We actually did a special edition, 2-part edition of the read along with Linda Amster and Hedrick Smith last year on the that would have been the 50th one, wasn't quite 50th, 50th anniversary from 71, which was incredible, and that was definitely one of the highlights of last year, without question. Let's take a look at what else we have on the front page here in the DC edition. It is, you mentioned the COVID story and the Russia story. This is the Olympic story, so it didn't get the display photo, still above the fold. And then that picture got moved down and it's a little bit smaller, as you can see. So that's just interesting to see the differences. The New York Times, of course, as we know, is printed. I can't remember the count offhand, at least 16, if not more than 20 presses around the country, so that folks can get it locally. Here in Washington, D.C., the Washington Post prints the New York Times. I get my Washington Post and New York Times in the same bag. I miss having my blue bag out of New York. But I know the Seattle Times prints it out of Seattle, where I used to live. Other stories on the front page, bottom corner, January 6 marchers still defiant. See it as a day one of a movement. So that is very disturbing. Did the stimulus fuel inflation rates? A policy debate heats up. So that's what we have on the actual front page. Let's dig in a little bit. Page 2 and 3 is always interesting. I particularly like the insider column on page 2 on the left-hand side. A legacy lives on in Brooklyn. This is the Times dedicated a new printing facility in Brooklyn on November 30th. Today, part of the building houses the Math and Science Exploratory School, where students run a newspaper. So that's always interesting. Did you ever get a tour of College Point?
No.
No. Sri did a show from there several years ago, which was incredible, to go there on a Thursday evening and interview Michael Connor, which is great. Of interest, this interesting piece where they tease different parts of the paper. Last year, according to the International Organization for Migration, some 650 migrants died near the U.S.-Mexico border. That's a teaser for the magazine. There's a piece on the breeding ground in the magazine. Mink keep intruders away from their territories by emitting an odor from their anal scent glands that is widely considered to be more pungent than that of skunks. So we'll see what else they have. The international story, poem of protest by an Afghan girl inspires U.S. students. Fariba Mohebi, the poet, at the Maud Tutoring Center this month in Kabul, Afghanistan. Video calls between students there and a history class in San Diego have formed a bond across oceans. Very interesting. We have also a giant factory in Serbia symbolizes downsides of China's investments. We always like paying attention to the ads as well. This is a full-page ad, how to choose more reliable orthopedic care. And it's like a full essay from the world's #1 in orthopedics, specialized since 1863, HSS. Definitely interesting. This is an article on the left. Why is Johnson in political danger? That's the Boris Johnson. And we can he undermined shared sacrifice was the criticism there. Let's see. Here's a smaller story, but worth noting. And I'll try and fold it so you can see it underneath. Let's see on the left-hand side there. 3 tiny islands bear brunt of tsunami. An aerial view of Fonofua, an island in Tonga, on Tuesday, days after the tsunami. Just 2 homes on the island were left intact. Just 2 homes. Wow, that is incredible. Let's see what else we have over here. Okay, you can see that. Whoa, centerfold ad from Verizon. America's most reliable network is going ultra. Certainly gets your attention. Certainly not a failing newspaper when you can get ads like that. Here's a big the cover, the jump from the on the China story, how Xi Jinping is staging the Olympics on his terms. You can see a big photo on the top, and then more photos on the right-hand side as well. UK says Moscow is plotting to install a pro-Russian leader in Ukraine. That's the other story that was on the lead next to the COVID story, at least in the DC edition. And then a big story about how Russia is having to defend Chernobyl. In Russia's shadow, Ukraine defends a hot zone. There's a pull quote: "We don't know what will kill us first, the virus, radiation, or war." And now we get into the national section. Omicron tilts rhythms of small town governance. All about how, when we have a lot of people calling in sick because of COVID, there isn't a backup plan in a lot of small towns. There's a quote: "I do everything my guys do, of course." Benny Daniels Jr., the police chief of Marvell, Arkansas, who worked 20-hour days last week while his staff was in isolation. And then another quote: "There's a handful of us. We can go get stuff taken care of." Lee Guest, the mayor, assistant fire chief, and a rural mail carrier in Marvell. That is showing how it's impacting small towns. And then this is the continuation of that story. To many marchers, January 6th started a movement. What is your take on the legal process for people who participated in January 6th? Is that is it just taking the time it needs to? Do you expect to see more aggressive prosecutions?
Well, the typical way these things work is you go after the easy fish at the bottom. You turn as many of them as you can and get incriminating statements from them so you can move up. Because what you want to know is this didn't happen overnight. We now have very clear evidence of that. There was funding for it. And we now know, because of a statement made on a Denver radio show that I'm on from time to time, we know there was this war room that Donald Trump actually called into at the Willard Hotel. And the plot by John Eastman, whom I once debated, and in the words of one of the Federalist students who invited me, wiped the floor with him because he's an ideologue, not a serious fact guy. I think you're going to see tougher sentences as we move up the chain for these people. I am surprised that on the day of the event that the Metropolitan Police or other agencies didn't corral people in the Capitol and only let them leave after they had been field identified. having to produce documentation of themselves so they could be found instead of having to use this crowdsourcing to hunt them down.
Patricia has a question for you. Which one do you prefer, paper or digital? Let us know, how many papers do you subscribe to, and then how many digital subscriptions do you have?
I get delivered to my house every day the Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle, which was the original Gannett flagship paper. Frank Gannett lived about 3 blocks from me. And then I subscribe to about 20 papers around the country, many of which I just dip into, or when they send me a notice of something I think matters, dip into. You can subscribe digitally very inexpensively for like $1 for 6 months and then cancel it and do it again. Or if they turn you down, use another email. But I'm a dinosaur. I much prefer paper.
Got it. So thank you for that. And Carla asks, why are so many people still loyal to Trump, especially the people on the lower end of the income scale who he did not help at all?
Well, there you have to appreciate the absolute failure of the Democratic Party to represent the people it says it represents, working people. I once told Nancy Pelosi to her face as she stood in front of me wearing, I would guess, $4,000 dress and Louboutins. For the people who don't know what those are $1,000 red-soled high heels, and said, you know, Nancy, I have no antipathy to wealth. I've made myself a wealthy man, but seriously, you're the representative of the party of working people, maybe dungarees. And so I saw her a few months later, and she walks up to me, she puts her hands on her little jacket and says, David, dungarees. And I looked at him and I said, yes, absolutely, Nancy, designer dungarees.
That's great.
The reality is that for every $1 of equity people have added in their homes, they've taken on $2 of debt.
Sure.
Times just ran a story about a family trying to find a place to live for $800,000 when the average salary in the United States, and that includes the 300 and almost 400 people who make over $100 million, over $50 million a year, is only $53,000. We have reoriented our economy, and the Democrats have played right along with this, in some cases been the instigators of it. Big companies like the Intel chip plants that are going to be built in Ohio, they're going to be built not with money from investors, but your tax dollars, at least in large part. And why do people do this? Because how many people who are in the bottom half of incomes, bottom half of salaries, half of Americans make less than $34,000 a year, half, less than $34,000. Why would they understand public policy, public finance? Why would they have any idea that government rules are draining money from their pockets? A penny here, 3 cents a day there. A penny a day from every American is $1.2 billion a year in round numbers if you're on the receiving end. And along comes Donald, who says, I alone can save you. I love you. Every campaign, we love you. And I will throw out the people on Wall Street, when, of course, he invites in the biggest predators and turns Washington into even more of a paradise for them. And I seriously blame the press, including the Times, for writing about this in abstract ways instead of making it clear to people what's going on, and that is the remaking of the economy and the legal system, very much so the legal system, to favor corporations and capital over people. And by the way, Neil, I'm going to be starting a streamed television show soon. Yeah. It keeps getting pushed back, called the Money and Power Report. And it's just about 2 things. There's $50 trillion of illicit money in the world. Drug money, tax evasion money, hiding from your spouse or partner money, criminal kleptocracy money, $50 trillion. The U.S. economy is only $21 trillion a year. So we're talking about enormous sums of money. And then the abusive use of legitimate money by people who are very wealthy. And that'll start on, unless I change my mind, it'll start on something called IBMTV.tv, although we're going to change the name of it. It's an India/South Carolina company that I'm on the board of.
I want to bring in this this comment from Mary. She was saying the not arresting people on January 6th was a travesty. And for example, Congressman Jamal Bowman was arrested for protesting voting rights just this week.
The only distinction I would draw there is that this was an event where Capitol Police were exhausted. The question is, why didn't Metropolitan Washington D.C. Police show up on the edge of the grounds, which are their territory? It stops at the sidewalk.
Sure.
Why wasn't there U.S. Park Police or other people? And of course, the answer to that is very simple. Well, the crowd was calling for hanging Mike Pence and shooting Nancy Pelosi. Nothing happened with Secret Service in the White House. If there was a threat to Donald, the Secret Service would have removed him immediately, but he was watching TV and calling people in and saying, now watch this, isn't this terrific? Which tells you what you need to know.
Michael says, I love listening to all your appearances, David. Please keep up your amazing work and sharing your tremendous insights. I want to turn our attention back to the paper. There's a piece that's local or relatively local to you. You're in Rochester. Right. Fighting to preserve towering testament to Buffalo's history. The Great Northern Grain Elevator was part of Buffalo's bustling grain business in 1900. Now it's under the threat of demolition. Buffalo is close enough to you. Is this something that's in your?
I've seen that grain elevator many times. It looms over the area where it's built. You could repurpose the grain elevator. We have a coal elevator in Pittsford, right outside Rochester. It's been turned into office space, but lots of industrial buildings go away. I'm not sure this is quite such a big deal. I do hope we have a moment to get to this story on the front of.
Absolutely. So let's turn to it. I was going to ask you which section do you want to go to next, and you telegraphed that really well. Let's find Sunday Styles.
Yeah, when they redid Sunday Styles around 1996, my best friend David Crook, who created the 12 million circulation Wall Street Journal Sunday, immediately called it mergers and acquisitions. That's what we refer to it because of the wedding announcements and the whole history of who's getting married to who. And occasionally, every now and then, you'll read one where somebody whose dad's a truck driver or whose mother is a hospital cafeteria worker makes it into those pages. But what I thought was interesting about this is here's Andre Leon Talley, a man who went from extreme poverty, one of, I think, 11 kids, to become this very important fashion maven and a perfectly fit subject. On the back page of the section, this is the only section the New York Times ever had a movie made about it.
Yeah,
27 Dresses, which is arguably the most polished rom-com ever made. It's just it's a rom-com, but it's flawless. But on the back is this story about the new Sex and the City revival and fashion detail about Hindu celebratory dress and Diwali, and the movie having a fundamental flaw. And I wish Andre Leon Talley had been alive, because I would have loved to read his quotes, either indicating this is an area of fashion he didn't understand, or what I'm sure would have been his devastating critique.
The article is for Sorry That Wasn't, a script that didn't say. A Sex and the City reboot seemed a bit confused about traditional Indian garments. And the way that the pull quote, unthinkable happens, a fashion faux pas on the most fashionable of shows.
And just to be clear, by the way, I don't pay any attention to fashion. Anybody who's seen me beyond this show knows I walk around like something like a rumpled bed.
This is, you mentioned Andre Leon Talley. I want to make sure that we show it's a full page picture on the cover. This is the top half, and it continues in terms of the bottom half. He was one of the great editors, those magisterial, almost mythic figures who elevated personal style to a kind of public religion. To many inside and outside the world of fashion, his words were golden, and he could make a photographer's day. There were several pieces about him. One of them was a reflection on his role as a mentor. That there was some question about how much time he spent mentoring others, and that he actually did more than I think people realized. I want to get to that part.
Neil, I am not a fan of using covers for these huge photographs or graphics.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, it doesn't mean we have to have all text like a 1950s version of the New York Times, but I think there's too much white space and too many huge photographs that the space could better be used with text or graphics. And if my memory is correct, when I left the paper in 2008, there were about 1,200 journalists. The Times reported the other day that it has 1,700, so that it's a bigger staff than ever. And there should be plenty of copy.
And a smaller news hole.
Yeah, good copy to put into the news hole.
Mm.
I think it's overdone when we run these, full page graphic illustrations.
Got it. So where next after Andre Leon Talley? What section do you want? We have about 10 minutes left. We want to make sure that we get to a few more pieces in the paper.
Well, let's go to Biz Day, where I worked.
Okay, certainly.
And Biz Day, which was only created in the 70s, has gone through many iterations. Each editor of a section, remakes their section the way they want it. One of the best things that Biz Day does is the columns by economists, some of them Nobel Prize-winning economists, people like Robert Shiller, who was the force behind Zillow, Mr. Irrational Exuberance, Professor Shiller, a couple of professors at the University of Chicago, where I had my fellowship 49 years ago. And in general, the Sunday business section does a good job of leading you to things that will be useful to you in your life, whether you're an investor or just a citizen.
So here's the cover story is about quitters. The big quit as over the last several months under COVID. When co-workers head for the exit, you think maybe the grass is greener somewhere else. Is this going to continue? Have we gotten to peak quit yet, or do you think it's ongoing?
I don't know if we're peak quit, but when people quit jobs, it's an indication of their faith that there's something else out there. Many people already have another job lined up. And what we're seeing is a revolt of people who put up with low wages, bad working conditions, bad benefits because they didn't see options. And a lot of people are now responding to this. I just did a piece at DCReport on how 21 states raised the minimum wage in January. And the point of the piece was that state governments in those 21 states are acting like a union for the lowest paid workers. If you're a tipped restaurant or bar worker, your minimum wage is set at $2.13, which since 1993 has fallen to be worth, I think it's $1.10 now. And the difference between that and the legal minimum wage has to be made up with your tips before you get any benefit from the tips. We have really, really pushed down on workers in America, and clearly there's been a response to this with the pandemic. And hopefully this will lead to a larger share of the value added going to the workers who make it possible. And maybe if we're lucky, we'll even get Congress to look at things like the workers at high-tech companies who are lured with big stock options and then get laid off not long before those options would vest and get nothing, as opposed to if your company gets rid of you and you've worked, say, 4 of the 5 years for your options to be vested, you ought to get 80% of them. You did the work. The company chose to get rid of you. They shouldn't be able to steal those wages. There's a real serious problem with wage theft in America. There's a chapter about it in the anthology I did called Divided, and it gets almost no attention in our favorite newspaper.
And here's that piece that you referenced in DCReport. The failure to raise minimum wage is a moral outrage, and how government is supporting folks that way.
And our policy at DCReport is we're snarky, we have a point of view, but we tell you that. We're not trying to be the New York Times or the Washington Post or the LA Times or the AP. So we tell you up front. Terry Schreiber, who was the number 2 editor of the LA Times, and then for 18 years, one of the senior editors at the New York Times, writes for us regularly, as do a variety of other people.
So, David, I want to make sure that we get a chance. We're coming toward the top of the hour. We're able to cover business and styles, of course. There's so much in the paper we couldn't get to, unfortunately. I'm sure that our viewers, a lot of our viewers, would be happy if we spent another hour with you. We already had someone ask you to come back at the very beginning, so we will certainly entertain that. We'd love to have you back, maybe when your TV show launches. But I wanted to make sure before we close out, we're going to make a few announcements, and then we're going to ask you to come back to give us a final word about the big cheat, and then also to offer a pro tip for writers and or investigative journalists, depending on how you want to frame it. So we'll give you a break, let you enjoy. If that coffee is still warm, you can check that out. And we'd love to know what brand of mug you're using, so we can share it with our readers. Check that out, and we'll bring you right back. Again, this has been another great episode. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and guest host, pinch hitter when necessary to jump in and carry the show. But we've been having a great conversation with David Cay Johnston. I want to make a couple of quick announcements. Next week, our guest is going to be Tara DePort. She is a contemporary artist, environmentalist, and justice advocate, founder and executive director of the Human Impacts Institute, more than 20 years of experience in community engagement and environmental communication. You can follow her on Instagram at Tara DePort Art. Tara DePort Art. I also want to give another shout out to our production team, Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. Every week they share links. They help us get great guests. Sri and I would not be able to put on this show without the team that is behind us. And as we're talking about Carla Baranakis, we also want to talk about the Local Connection newsletter. The Local Connection newsletter is put out by Montclair State University, the Center for Cooperative Media. Each week, it offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. This is why I'm asking David to give us a pro tip. Best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips. bit.ly/local news tips. We want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Muckrack, of course, and remind people that this show and others are produced by the firm that Sri co-founded and that I joined about a year and a half ago now, full time. We do social and digital consulting, virtual event production, hybrid events. We do webinars, conferences, you name it. If you'd like to have us produce a show like this for you, please reach out, Sri@digimentors.group or Neil@digimentors.group. We'd love to work with you. We'd love to consult. With this wave of Omicron, we're seeing a lot of clients go back to the idea of online events, if not hybrid events, so they can reach their audience. So reach out and let us know if we can help you. Sri@digimentors.group or Neil@digimentors.group. With that, I'm going to bring back David Cay Johnston to offer us a final word. Oh, before we do that, David, I just want to make sure one more announcement. On Tuesday, our friend Rose Horowitz is going to be hosting Women to Follow. This episode, Carving Your Own Path, Advice for Nonprofits and Business Leaders. Her guest is Laura Gassner-Oting. Again, Tuesday, January 25th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Don't miss it. Okay, David. So,
first of all, this is called an Ember.
An Ember is the brand.
Yes.
EMBER?
EMBER.
Great. Great.
So the pro tip is, if you want, particularly in this environment, to have a career, then don't be a commodity. Who is the most successful, financially at least, journalist in the history of the world? It's Martha Stewart. Martha Stewart is a journalist. She does home economics journalism, but it's journalism that she does. And she polishes it, and polishes it and does it like nobody else. There are other people who've done the same thing. So don't be part of the herd. It's so easy to just, go to the press conference and report what everybody else is reporting. Then you're just a commodity. You can just be replaced by anybody else who does the same thing. Develop yourself, develop areas of expertise, learn how things work at the level of principle and theory. That's what I used to teach, the law of the ancient world, the business law in one class and the property and tax law in the other, as a way to teach modern law. I'm now teaching pre-law students, and our whole focus is on principle and theory, not mechanics. Learn things at the level of principle and theory. Whatever it is you are writing about, you will see stories nobody else will see. They'll be very obvious to you because you have a theoretical understanding of whatever it is you're writing about. If you're taking on a new subject, when I left the LA Times to go cover the casino industry for the Philadelphia Inquirer under Gene Roberts, the first thing I did was get out the very first gift my wife, Jennifer Leonard, who this is the 23rd, so we've been married 39 years, 8 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days, not long enough, gave me, which was an Oxford English Dictionary, the compact version. And I looked up every word I could make a list of about gambling. That alone gave me a pretty good education about the casino industry and about gambling. Learn things deeply. Why do we have police? Is one of the things I ask my students. Where did they come from? They don't exist in the ethers. And if you don't know what the ethers are, look it up. Sometimes you'll see it with an S and without an S, but AETHER. But stand out, think differently, take a different tack. Now, you'll encounter editors who will only want to do the same thing that everybody else is doing. That can be a problem, but just show how yours is better and more informing. Add value by your insights and your expert knowledge of things, and you'll have a much greater chance at having a successful career. And well, the kind of career I was able to enjoy with enough salary to raise 8 kids and become a homeowner and do well is unlikely for most people going forward, at least under the current situation with the creative destruction of the internet. There are huge opportunities if you're entrepreneurial about this. Water, there's probably room for 3 world-class water journalists. Pets or animals, there's an enormous market out there where you could build yourself up to cover these things. And there are many other subjects where you can become an expert and be entrepreneurial and do very well while doing useful, important work for people by telling them that which they would not know but for your diligence.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. I'm going to bring Shri back up. Really appreciate your time with us today and all the insights. As everyone is saying, your work has been incredible, so needed throughout your career, not just now, but over the course of your career. We want to just take a moment and share some of the comments, some of the kudos that have been coming in.
Amazing. Jessica says, stand out, think differently, take a different tact, add value to your insights. Bravo, bravo, thank you. And I saw Amy also had a comment. And
yep.
Amy
started with, yeah. we got them. She appreciated the matching. I do want to point that if David took off his sweatshirt, his thing, he'd be matching Shri. So we're close either way, right?
Except it would say SF Gators over here, even though there are no alligators in San Francisco.
Nice. Patricia says, thanks again, David, and the entire production team for another great episode. I learned so much just sitting back and watching you two read the paper. Rose says, my vote for another show with David Cay.
Maybe when my tax book comes out would be a good time to do that. That should be about
absolutely. And we also want to help you promote your show when it gets the TV show when it comes in. And Jonathan says, great show. Thank you. And Emily says, thank you. We're just great to see all these comments. And Ken says, thanks to the production team. Apollo says, this was great. Thanks for the tips, David, and have a great week. Great episode. Thanks. Stay safe, everyone. Truly appreciate it. Mary says, thanks all. Always learn something from you, David. And her show is Equal Time with Mary C. Curtis podcast. I'm going to finish that book I'm working on. And as you said, you're not working on books, you're just working on those chapters or magazine articles that you stitch together. And Diana says, great guest this week. David is so interesting and I learned so much. And David, Diana's up at 5:30 in the morning to listen to you. Now it's close. Now it's slightly more decent hour, but not by much. And Ellen says, thank you, Neil, Sri, Paula, Carla, most of all, David Cay Johnston. Love this program. Please have him on again. We will when his book comes out. Jamie says, to the team, thank you, learning. Thank you for putting on a great show today. And David, for your time with us. And so many others. I don't think David wants to keep listening to this, but stand out, think differently, take a different tact, add value to your insights. Bravo, bravo. Everyone, tell your friends to get the book. Teach them. If there's someone in your life who is a skeptic on all things to do with this kind of understanding of where we should be, please give them the book. And Miriam says, looking forward to David's TV show. Debbie said, David speaks truth to power. Hooray. And Doug says, David KJ is a hero for his perseverance. Thank you very much. Shout out to DCReport.org, everyone. Sign up, read it. You will learn so much that's not in the mainstream news. I remember David speaking up very early about Trump when people didn't believe it. I remember Fareed Zakaria calling Trump a bullshit artist on television. That was a shocker for many people when he did it in early 2016. But he was so right. You were so right, David. So thank you very much. And we'll let you get back to your Sunday. Thanks, everybody.
Before we go, Sri, I just want to make sure we all see this incredible drawing that Liza Donnelly did of Sri and David at Social Media Weekend back in 2018.
Yeah, Liza is an awesome cartoonist at the New Yorker, and here we are, captured forever in this lovely cartoon. And David responded to what was happening. Was I was on JetBlue flying, I don't know from where, and I watched him do an interview, and I said I'd love to have him at Social Media Weekend. He responded within 30 minutes. We booked him, and he was at Social Media Weekend a couple of months later. And then yesterday, I was again on JetBlue coming back from San Juan and was able to message David. So
that was Sri, that was when I did my 5 continents on 5 Fridays lecture tour, which was insane.
Wow, it's just really amazing. So David, you're awesome. And everyone, just a reminder, my newsletter should be in your inboxes if you're a subscriber. It's free, srinet.substack.com. And David might have a thought on this particular question. An American colleague of ours lives in the Czech Republic. He came back here for a few months, and his daughter needs some medical help. And he has spent thousands of dollars out of his pocket, where in the Czech Republic, it would have cost him almost nothing. And that's where we are today, as you know. So srinet.substack.com. If you folks can get a chance to check it out, I'd appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Neil, and the entire team, Carla, Paula, Steve, and Julia. Bye-bye, everybody.